Got another question from Catherine Bass.
Hi. Do you agree that the police should have extra powers to remove climate change protesters?
So
yes,
we've seen these protests on the M25.
Yes,
the government's now taken out an injunction. What do you think, Catherine?
Well, so I'm a self-employed florist. I work for myself, obviously. And I was thinking about that. I was listening to the Jeremy Vine show, as I do every day. And they were talking about it. And I was quite upset in a way, because if you're stuck there, like in my case, for example, if I have a coffin spray in the back of my delivery van, and I can't get to that funeral because the road is blocked, then that's not very nice for these people. Especially, I've worked all through the pandemic as well by myself, because I got the flowers direct delivered from Holland, so I was actually possible to do that. I didn't have to go to the wholesalers, so they stuck it in my home garage where I worked behind closed doors. So I've done loads and loads and loads of funerals. And then, though, to have to deal with that hardly anyone could go to the funerals, that was really hard for me as well.
And do you think the police should have extra powers to stop the M25 protesters?
Well, I think they should do more about it. You know, I've listened so much to the radio the last 18, 22 months, and yeah, sometimes my heart is just going a bit crazy about things. And also, if you're, for example, a mother with a baby in the back, and then you're stuck for 5 hours there, maybe your bottle runs out.
What are you going to do?
So,
yes, exactly. Can I just ask, does anyone here support what the protesters are doing on the M25 and think it might be inconvenient, but actually it's the right thing to do? You've got your hand up there.
It's inconvenient and it's not the best way, but if the government did something about things, they wouldn't have to take those actions. So do something and then it'll stop.
Yeah. The man at the back in the grey top.
Yeah, I agree with the lady. There wouldn't be a problem if the government did something about climate change. Instead of claiming to be, you know, the leader of the world in climate change, why don't we actually do something about it instead of just claiming? OK, well, listen, let's come back to the question. Do you agree the police should have extra powers to remove climate change protesters? So, Grant, you have just managed to give the police extra powers because you've got a temporary injunction to stop the protesters protesting on the M25 itself, nowhere else. Is that enough? Are you going to go further? Are you happy with that?
Look, I am actually completely with the lady who asked the question. It is completely irresponsible. It's totally dangerous to walk onto a motorway. They're putting their own lives and the lives of people on the motorway at risk. It's counterproductive because the traffic stands there causing the pollution they claim they care about in their homes, which turn out not to be insulated. I cannot imagine why on earth anyone would think it was a good idea to step onto a motorway like that. That's why I asked National Highways, who run our motorways, to get hold of an injunction, which they did the other night. That injunction is now in place. But the reality is that if we want to solve climate change, that is something that this government is passionate about doing. We're moving towards electric vehicles. We've got a transport decarbonisation, a plan for it, which no other country in the world has got. We've been
the Committee on Climate Change
than any other country in the G7.
The Committee on Climate Change says you are not on track to meet your net zero target by 2050.
Well, the committee,
and your policies have yet, or your 10-point plan has yet to be backed by firm policies.
The Committee on Climate Change, I think I'm right in saying, made that before we set the latest carbon budget. It gets very technical. It's called CB6, which puts us on, which if we achieve, of course, will put us on track to do it. But, you know, perfectly legitimate for people to protest. We have an open democracy where people should be able to do that. But walking onto a motorway, putting their lives and others and the emergency services at risk, it's completely out of order, and that's why I stepped in to stop it.
Okay. David, will you be comfortable if some of these protesters go to prison?
Yes, because I support the right to protest, absolutely. I don't support the government in some of the changes they've made to protests, but you have to protest within the law. I think there was a woman who ended up with some paralysis this week because she couldn't get to hospital, and that underlies the problem. So I think the High Court were right in their decision. The powers, I think, are there. I'm not sure the police are asking for further powers. Yes, people should protest. And yes, there's room also for civil disobedience, but I think some of what we've seen is actually not commanding the support of the public. And the whole point of protest is to command the support of the public, and that's clearly not happening.
And these powers are temporary. Would you like to see them permanently?
I think the police are not asking for more powers. So the powers are there, and I think the High Court's decision sends a powerful signal to both the protesters and the police about what's expected.
Man there in the pale blue shirt, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think people might find their methods questionable, but the government says that it's serious about, or passionate about climate change. Boris Johnson today is talking about a turning point for humanity. He's referencing Kermit the Frog.
It's not easy being green.
Yeah.
Spending each day the colour of a leaf.
Although he says it is easy to be green, and yet they're investing in major infrastructure projects like East-West Rail that connects Cambridge and Oxford, which will put diesel trains, new railway with diesel trains, you know, on a major new railway. And that, to me, is the government heading very definitely down the wrong track, or Boris perhaps treating us all like Muppets.
Man here.
I don't think that blocking a road is the right way to go about things, but I do think that the more restrictions you put on people's rights to protest, the more of a sort of state we're becoming, where if you want to speak out, if you want to make your feelings heard, you're just put down straight away. You're putting an extremist column, and you can't say what you truly believe.
But would you be happy if you were sitting on the M25 trying to...
No, I wouldn't. I don't support that, but I believe that the more restrictions we put, it's like, where does it end?
Okay, the man in the back in the white shirt.
Two things. One, I look at the different, not the ones on the M25 but before, and I get the impression that the police don't seem to have control of it, whether they're too soft, whether there's not enough of them. They must have the intel to prepare for this. The second thing, if it were me, and I'm not a politician, I'd take one of them HGV lorries where they're sitting, I'd arrest them, put them in that wagon and send them to top of Scotland, make their own way back and stop them from bleeding doing it. Because it just...
I wonder how Scotland would feel about that.
Well, they might, but the thing for me is they're right in what they're doing, as in
the principle,
change.
You think?
They're right in that, but the way that they're doing it, just really making people's days really bad and horrible, and they shouldn't be doing that, because if they want support, they better take us with them. And if they don't, they're going to be like they are now. Most of us agree with what they're about, but not the way they're doing it, and they'll lose that support, and then in the end, it will be for nothing.
I mean, the point they make is unless they do something very big and noisy that everyone notices, life just carries on.
Yeah, but if they went to Moscow, Peking, Bombay, and started doing it where it's a real problem, you'd go, well done, we'll have some of that as well. But they don't. It's too easy here because we make it too easy. But we agree with what they're saying, but come on, get a grip yourselves.
Okay.
I'm always sceptical to give the police more powers, and we don't need to in this circumstance. It's already an offence to obstruct a highway. So I don't think that's a necessary thing to do. I think the police have a tough job at the moment in figuring out how to facilitate this, but the reality is if you form a protective circle around people sitting in the middle of a motorway, they're going to keep sitting there. And there's a reason we don't go sit in the middle of motorways. I mean, not that that's how many of us would want to spend our time anyway. But I think there does need to be a really hard line on this. I completely agree with the right to protest and protecting those very sacred rights. But this isn't normal protest. This is just absolute destruction and chaos, and it is jeopardizing people's lives in the back of ambulances. It's putting people in a terrible situation. And I think David hit the nail on the head when he said that it's about swaying hearts and minds. And we're in a great position in the UK where if you look at the major parties, you might not like all their policies by any means, but their voting base is in agreement that we want to make this a greener world, that we want to tackle climate change. But you're not winning people over and you're not helping the cause when you just ruin someone's day or actually put somebody in danger. So this needs to be cracked down on and quite quickly.
Munir?
Let me be very clear. They have gone about campaigning on climate change in absolutely the wrong way and are putting the cause back by the danger that they are creating, causing.
I mean, they might argue at least we're talking about it.
Sorry?
They might argue that at least we're talking about it.
Absolutely, but I think it's important to say I don't agree with the means at all. The cause I do agree with, and I mean, Grant says, you know, we're a leader in climate change policies. I mean, these people are campaigning to insulate Britain, right? When the Liberal Democrats were in government between 2010 and 2015, we had a zero carbon home standard, which was got rid of once the Tories were on their own. Not a single zero carbon home has been built since then. We had an obligation on energy companies to pay for and support insulation of homes. That was scrapped. Okay, so we need, the reason why energy bills are going up, apart from the fact that global prices have gone up, is because our homes are not insulated very well at all. And therefore, if we want to cut fuel poverty, if we want to cut bills, if we want to cut emissions, we need to have an emergency insulation programme. So I absolutely agree with their aims, but I don't agree with the means. And I think we've seen this week, actually, that the police have all the powers they need to deal with them.
I've seen the opposite.
And no, but you went to the High Court, you got the injunction straight away, and through the injunction, you were able to take action. You don't need to go further, as you are legislatively, where you're going to be cracking down on very peaceful protest, quite often against this government. It's really sinister.
So you're talking about the police crime sentencing
That's right.
bill. Richard.
Well, I think any rational person would agree with their cause, and any rational person would disagree with their methods, which are dangerous and idiotic, and disrupt people's lives. And as David referenced, it has destroyed one lady's life as well. The whole environmental debate needs reframing, not to focus on cost and compromise, but we need to talk about jobs and opportunity. Now, with regards to the insulation elements, absolutely, that is a clear thing that we can, must and should do, but I believe the government fully agree with that, and they'd like to insulate homes by 2035. But there's 20 million households in the UK, and it will cost on average about £1,000 to do so per household. So that's a lot of dough. So what we need now is to see a proper, well thought through, robust plan in terms of how we're actually going to scale this up as quickly as possible.
I'm not sure any rational person would agree with every single one of their claims. They come up with some pretty extreme stuff that isn't necessarily backed by the scientific community. And on top of that, let's point out another reason that energy bills are going up. It's because renewables, wind and solar, this past few months haven't been as reliable as they have been in the past. It hasn't been as windy. We haven't had as much sun. Now, as somebody who would love to be able to move to a completely renewable system, who doesn't want a greener world, we're being a bit dishonest with ourselves about where we're actually at and what we can achieve. The only way we get to net zero by 2050, the only way we do this properly is if we bring people with us. And we need to be honest about the fact that we have been focused on decarbonization quite rightly, but the UK, more so than a lot of other European countries, has undermined its own energy security. We had far less gas reserve in the UK than Germany or France or Italy did. We're in a real bind now. So we need to have this honest conversation, and we might applaud their end goal, but I don't think it's fair to say that any rational person thinks that we should just adopt their policies overnight, whether they sit on the M25 or not. It's that dishonesty that's partially gotten us into this energy crisis to begin with.
Ultimately, what we need is a more diverse, greener, resilient energy mix, and it's not a binary choice of fossil energy or non-fossil energy. We have the biggest tidal streams in the world.
But if you speak to the people on the M25, they may not like your nuanced answer, is my point. There's a whole host of
other stuff. Hydrogen, where already we have amazing R&D. We need to scale that up. Let's talk about micro-nuclear.
Speak to people on the M25 and they might not agree with your relatively nuanced position on this. That's what I'm saying.
Slightly off the actual question, which was about whether it was right for people to go on the M25 rather than the power supply, but both the other politicians on the panel have mentioned the police already having the powers. That was evidently not the case when the same people who were protesting on the first day were out on the third day and then on the fifth day, having been arrested each time in between. The reason I had to take an injunction was it was the only way to make that contempt of court and therefore imprisonable, and supporting the police and crime bill would actually help folks, but neither of these guys are doing that.
But you got the injunction that
but
you
only
needed.
on the M25.
And what you're saying...
So now you're suggesting I get a judge to go out and do every single motorway separately? We need laws which do the obvious things that we all agree with.
I want to get another question in, so I'm just going to move on, if I may. Sarah Blaseby.
The Prime Minister has said that we should all be able to see our GP face to face.